So, we'll make a start. It is 12:30, so today we have Rose Pennington doing her COC, and with Alex and Anthony as her supervisors. Over to you, Rose.
Thank you very much. Hi, as Chris said, my name's Rose Pennington. I'm a part-time PhD student, which is why you won't be seeing me around here. I spend a couple of days a week with my PhD, and then the other 3 days I teach at a primary school. I'm a primary school teacher, so that's basically a bit about me. My presentation today is called The Nature of Positive Education, Theoretical Framework, Measurement and Outcomes, which I appreciate sounds like quite a large sort of topic to be covering. Just to go through how it's going to be set up, I'll go through a bit of background to positive education, what I believe is missing or some gaps, then talk about the 3 studies that I intend to do for my PhD, and then at the end we'll welcome suggestions from anybody in the audience as to how perhaps I might make it better or change things. The overarching aim of my PhD, or overarching aims rather, will be to define positive education in terms of the pedagogy that it entails. So as a primary school teacher, I'm very passionate about the importance of defining pedagogy. So it's not just about the content of what we're teaching, but also about how we do it. So I'm interested in what that means for positive education. I want to construct or find a theoretical framework for the implementation of positive education, and also gain some understanding of the impact of positive education, or of a positive education intervention rather. So just to give you a bit of a background to the positive education movement as it stands today. So there has been a lot of interest since the advent of positive psychology on its application to an educational environment. School is an amazing opportunity or a context in which to implement the ideas that come with positive psychology. And not only that, but there's also a real emphasis now on the importance of wellbeing in the educational arena, full stop. So this is seen in the Melbourne Declaration on Educational Goals for Young Australians, which was published in 2008 and talked to the 10 years coming up to the end of it now. But it had 2 goals, and it informs the Australian curriculum and how we approach schooling in Australia. So the first goal was about equity and excellence, which is about making sure that that's making sure that students reach their full potential, which is of course so important for their wellbeing. The second goal of the Melbourne Declaration was about making sure that our students in Australia are critical and creative thinkers and able to manage their overall wellbeing. So both goals of the Melbourne Declaration are actually working towards wellbeing. I know a lot of the time when I hear about Melbourne Declaration in association with student wellbeing, they sort of people focus on goal 2, but I actually think that equity and excellence is just as important for wellbeing, because we need to make sure that students reach their potential. And it's followed up with the National Safe Schools framework, which is a set of guiding principles so that schools can set themselves up according to their own context to promote wellbeing, to make sure it's a safe, supportive environment, which in turn promotes the wellbeing of students. So these things, in a policy arena, indicate that wellbeing is really, really important in Australia. Geelong Grammar School was the first positive education school, or the first school to implement positive education. They had Dr. Martin Sullivan come out in 2008 as well, and he implemented a model which was closely aligned to the PER model, which I'll go into shortly, plus physical health as well. And finally PISA, which is the Positive Education Schools Association, which has been started in Australia and is another nod, I guess, to the importance of positive education in Australia and how it's rising up. So that's just a bit of an idea about positive education in Australia at the moment. So in terms of the current theories and practice, we know that wellbeing is really important in the Australian context, or the student wellbeing rather, and we know that we want to promote it. So just a bit of information about how positive education is actually being practiced and the theories that are informing that. So there are a lot of brief positive psychology interventions that are in place, and what I mean by that is you might have some outside instructors come in and perform, give classes for 10 weeks at a time, say on a particular topic pertaining to positive psychology, maybe mindfulness, relationship building, that kind of thing. It may be conducted by the classroom teacher, so somebody comes, they get given a set of lesson plans and they might do it, but again, it's for a brief time. And there is some research that shows that they are really successful. The research shows that perhaps it could be, or it sort of suggests that maybe it's to do with the classroom teacher and the fact that the classroom teacher is presenting these interventions, and it is actually to do with the relationship that they have with the students. There is an emphasis on an integrated or whole school approach to positive education. So in some respects we talk about brief positive psychology interventions, and then other areas talk about integrating these approaches across all areas of the schools. And then in terms of the theoretical underpinning, it assumes that the main theories associated with positive psychology are applicable in and complementary to an educational context. So what I mean by that is you will read about positive education and you will see application of theories that we know and love that are being applied in a school context, and often with successful results. So for example, Barbara Fredrickson's broaden and build theory asserts that with positive emotions, it means that students are able, or once experience positive emotions, it means that students are able to take in more, and then on top of that actually do something with it and create more. So that has really clear ramifications in a classroom context, because if you've got students who are experiencing positive emotions, then they are actually going to take in what they're being taught, and not only that, they're not just sponges, that will actually be able to be creative with it. Another example is self-determination theory, which asserts that you need 3 different elements in order to be motivated. So you need to make sure that there's connectedness and relationships in the classroom, or rather connected relationships, autonomy, and efficacy. Again, really clear to see how that applies to an educational context, because teachers, educators need to be really aware of these factors when they are trying to engage their students. Mindset theory, Dweck's mindset theory talks about feedback and the importance of teacher feedback. So rather than telling a student that they are so smart, focusing on the fact that they are working really hard. Okay, you can't do it yet. What are your strengths and what are you likely to be able to do given perseverance? Again, clear ramifications in an educational context. So all of these positive psychology theories are really clearly applicable in a school context. Flow theory, Csikszentmihalyi's flow theory, wrote that down phonetically, talks about engagement again. So making sure that there is a complete and energised engagement in what they're doing. That is what I want for my students. If I'm walking around and looking at a student who's sort of gazing out the window, which, Year 4 students are able of doing, even if they are particularly engaged. So you've got to give them that. But, I want to make sure that they are engaged. And PERMA theory, finally. So looking at the different elements of PERMA and how they are applicable in the classroom. So in terms of theoretical underpinnings so far, this seems to be where we're at, and we're looking at how these positive psychology theories have been taken and then what they look like in the classroom. So far, what do I perceive is missing from this picture? So the applications, as I've just said, of the theories of positive psychology to an educational setting emphasises the development of wellbeing outcomes, not necessarily, it could, but not necessarily academic outcomes as well. Is positive education simply positive psychology applied to a school setting? I believe it's not. I think that actually positive education is an entity unto itself, where absolutely we need to take positive psychology theories, but we need to combine them with pedagogy and educational psychology. So in order to address wellbeing and academic outcomes, there needs to be a focus on learning theories of educational psychology in conjunction with positive psychology. I was at a talk maybe a couple of years ago now, and someone, I think maybe it was my school, or someone was talking about positive education, and they were sort of talking about all the importance of wellbeing outcomes, which is really, you know, wonderful and commendable. But they sort of made a joke about the fact that, oh, you know, don't worry, I'm not going to mention pedagogy. And everyone sort of laughed, but because I'm obviously a nerd and I'm really a purist when it comes to education, I thought, no, we can't not mention pedagogy when we're talking about positive education, because pedagogy is how teachers know what to do. So teachers understand, I mean, when you're teaching kindergarten, for example, we understand the content, year 6, whatever, your subject matter, you understand what the content is. But the key to being a really effective teacher is in your pedagogy and making sure that you're doing the right thing to elicit the right responses from your students. So that was what really sort of piqued my interest, and I thought, hang on, we can't have a discussion about positive education without a discussion about pedagogy. So that's where my sort of passion has come from, to try to merge the theories from positive psychology and also educational psychology. So that's the first bit of what I perceive is missing. And so as a result, I have, with my colleagues, Anthony, Lex, Tony, have put together a model of positive education, whereby we focus on academic skills and social emotional skills. We explicitly teach academic content, we explicitly teach social and emotional skills, but we also embed these things so that students have the opportunity to practice. So just like you're going to teach that 3 + 2 = 5, you want to give students the opportunity to practice when they're at the canteen doing addition, for example. Similarly with social and emotional skills or wellbeing skills, we want to make sure that we teach them and we let the kids unpack what courage means, for example, but then also give them natural occurring opportunities to practice those things out on the playground, in class, whatever it might be. Which equals positive education, according to this model, which results in both academic outcomes and wellbeing outcomes. And I think that we really need to make sure that we're focusing on both and not one or the other. For years in schooling, and the current rhetoric in the media and everything is that, you know, we've had way too much focus on academic outcomes and not enough on wellbeing. I think we need to be careful that we don't go too far the other way and we only focus on developing the whole person, or rather developing the wellbeing instead of developing the whole person, which is about academic and wellbeing outcomes and achievements. So in order to organise this model, the traditional organising framework that we all know is PERMA. So positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning and accomplishment, and applying these things to the school setting to try to establish wellbeing and academic outcomes. Martin Seligman said that the time has come for a new prosperity, one that takes flourishing seriously as the goal for education and parenting. Note on Prosper. Enter the Prosper framework, which is a school-specific, see what I did there, school-specific organising framework for positive education. So there are clear similarities between PERMA and Prosper, but the difference is that these elements of Prosper are school-specific, which is of course what we want in a school. So positivity. That's talking about setting up an environment for students in which they will be engaged through cooperative learning tasks, dancing, making sure that, you know, their particular interests are piqued so that they experience positivity, which speaks to your work as well, Cherokee and colleagues, about making sure that it is not just about content but also about context. So making sure we're putting students in a situation where they're going to experience positivity. Of course they're going to experience negativity as well, but we want to make sure that we are providing that environment for the students. Relationships at school, so specifically school relationships, so relationships between teachers and students and their peers, teachers and teachers, and school staff in general. Outcomes, so this is looking at academic outcomes and making sure that we are enabling students, what I was talking about earlier with the equity in the Melbourne Declaration, enabling students to fulfil their potential and achieve these outcomes. Strengths, knowing their character, and also ability strengths. So, you know, right down to year 2, I'll talk to my students about what are your ability strengths, what are your character strengths, and they're able to reel them off like that. It's really important that we don't keep it a secret from the kids what their strengths are. As teachers, we all know straight away, well, within about half an hour of talking to a kid or looking at what they can do, we sort of understand what their ability strengths are, but it's really important that the students know that too. And they also understand what their limitations are, but then talking to the mindset theory, making sure that they can work on those limitations and their strengths as well. P is for purpose. So that's about making sure that the learning intentions are really, really clear to the students. So why are we teaching you this? Why are we making you sit through this lesson? Making sure that the purpose of their day is really clear. And not only that, but also putting them in a situation where they'll be able to do something purposeful, whether it be you know, working in a charitable situation would be an extreme example, or going to an old people's home or something like that. Engagement. I've spoken about engagement already, making sure that we are setting up a situation for students. And this is where, of course, these positive psychology theories are peppering through as well. How are we going to make sure that our students are engaged? And finally, resilience. So not just hoping that resilience will come out as a miraculous result of having good relationships, although I do believe that it's very important, in fact vital, to have good relationships in order for resilience, but also specifically and explicitly unpicking what resilience is and what can you do, sort of cognitive behaviour activities to make sure that kids know, okay, I'm facing a challenge, what can I do specifically? And that's when it comes back to the model that I was showing before, so explicitly talking about resilience and what you can do to build it, and then putting them in a situation where they can practice it. You know, okay, you are about to do a really hard test or a confirmation of candidature presentation, say, and they need, you know, what can I do to make sure that I'm going to be okay with it? And so the other bit at the end of that model that I showed you were the 2 outcomes. So we want academic outcomes, wellbeing outcomes. That is our goal for our students of positive education. So what do we know about that so far? In terms of wellbeing outcomes, there has been a meta-analysis of 17 studies of the Penn Resiliency Program, which is a school-based resilience program, that showed that yes, in fact, in a lot of cases, depressive symptoms were reduced as a result of doing these programs. Teacher wellbeing is an outcome that might not necessarily be the sort of first thing you think about, because I've been talking about student wellbeing, but as a result of teaching the Bounce Back program in Scotland, which Bounce Back is a positive education program written by Noble and McGrath, and they were teaching it across 17 schools in Scotland for a couple of years, and before they started it they did the teachers did the Warwick Edinburgh Wellbeing Survey. Yeah. And then 6 months and 18 months afterwards as well, and there was a statistically significant increase in the average of wellbeing, which has huge ramifications in my mind for what these programs can do for adults as well as the students. In terms of academic outcomes, in a meta-analysis by Durlack and colleagues of 213 studies, they found that on average students were 11 percentage points higher on the achievement test if they had been through a social and emotional learning program compared to those students who had not been. And academic tenacity is a concept spoken about by Dweck and also Noble and McGrath in their Prosper framework. Academic tenacity comes as a result of having the other elements of Prosper, so having positivity, having relationships, engagement, all these things. And academic tenacity means that you've got academic goals and you've got the persistence to work towards them. So these are the outcomes that we sort of understand and are hoping for at the moment from positive education. And then to finish off what is missing relating to what I've just been talking about. So we don't know, in terms of the Prosper framework, just let me read that, evidence for whether these school-specific constructs of wellbeing are measurable and therefore able to serve as the framework for and inform a positive education intervention. So we don't know. The PROSPER framework, of school-specific variables, seems really great because it addresses positive education and positive psychology from a school-specific standpoint, but we don't know whether they are measurable, and as I say, therefore being able to be used when you're putting together a positive education intervention. And we don't have an accurate understanding of the outcomes of positive education, which elements contribute to wellbeing and or academic outcomes. So if I'm looking at wellbeing and academic outcomes as the most important facets of what positive education is, then I want to know exactly what do we need to do to get those outcomes that I was talking about. So we have some problems. Does positive education equal the application of positive psychology in schools? The definition lacks precision. At the moment it looks like that's what we're sort of working towards and the assumption we're working towards, but as I say, I would like to assert that it is a separate entity. How to implement and measure positive education and what outcomes can be expected. So from here, for study 1, I'm going to be asking what is the definition of positive education? What is the theoretical framework on which it is based? For study 2, I'm going to ask which school-specific factors should be measured to develop an accurate picture of student wellbeing. And how does this inform the way that the positive education is going to be implemented? And the third study is, does the effective implementation of positive education influence the wellbeing of the entire community? So the students, the staff, the parents and others. What are the significance? What is the significance of these questions, and when I have an answer for them, what is it going to mean? So a theoretical framework for positive education is extremely important because we need a theory, because once you have a theoretical framework, you are able to take that theoretical framework and apply it to lots of different contexts. So we'll be able to say, okay, according to the theory, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to apply my context and this is what is going to happen as a result. Therefore, this is what we need to do. So it will enable schools from across a broad spectrum of contexts take this framework in terms of educational and positive psychology, so your pedagogy but also what you're teaching, and apply it to their own context. Clear practical guidelines for implementation and measurement. Again, this will mean that schools are able to take a practical piece of advice and guidelines to implement it according to their context. So I can't push that enough. So it's pointless, I think, to have a one-size-fits-all approach. It's so important in a school situation to be able to take a particular context and apply it to the guidelines. And finally, understanding the impact on the school community, because, as I say, if a set of teachers' wellbeing rises that dramatically as a result of teaching a program, the ramifications for a community, if the students are going home and talking to their parents about it, etc., that could have huge ramifications for the wellbeing of the community. So first of all, I'll be doing a systematic review into positive education. I will search databases for peer-reviewed articles, cover interventions implemented with students at school, targeting mainstream classes and published in English. And I'll be focusing on positive education, the term. The term positive education is relatively young, and as such there is a manageable amount of articles just. But when you are looking at social and emotional learning as well, mental health education, it gets bigger than Ben-Hur. So what I plan to do is study the positive education articles which fit these criteria, and then I'm going to evaluate their appropriateness of the design to my research question, their risk of bias, choice of outcome measure, quality of reporting and intervention, and their generalisability. And I'm going to compare them to educational and positive psychological theories to establish the framework. So while I say that if I'm not going to include social and emotional learning in my search, I definitely will be comparing the positive education articles to other information about social and emotional learning, for example. The second study will be developing a school-specific wellbeing measurement. So there are a number of wellbeing measurements available and that are being used in schools, but I think, as I've said, it's really important that we make sure that the measures are school-specific. So the aim of this is to investigate the associations among 5 generic wellbeing constructs, PERMA, and 7 school-specific wellbeing constructs, PROSPER, so in a school for a student population. And to ascertain whether there are differences in these constructs among students from Year 2 to Year 6. I am just focusing on early school, so primary school. My hypotheses are that resilience as a school-specific variable is more strongly related to the school-specific measures than the more generic PERMA measures. And I hypothesise that there will be differences in the PERMA and PROSPER measures for students at different year levels. So I think that there will be a difference for Year 2, for example, through to Year 6. So the way that this is going to be done is in a group of schools up in the Upper Hunter. They have recently, a couple of years ago now, started a charity. A woman very sadly lost her son to suicide. And she started a foundation called Where There's a Will. And they have decided that they want to implement positive education across all the schools in the district, which is 24 schools in the Upper Hunter region, both high school and primary schools. So I'm taking 5 of those schools, and I'm going to implement the Bounce Back program, which is a set of explicit lessons for positive education covering various different facets of wellbeing. So it's a set of lesson plans that are done multi-year through K through to 6 and every week. And then from there as well, there are guidelines for how the schools can embed it across other areas. So you've got the explicit and the embedded. So for 6 months they will be implementing the Bounce Back program, and the participants will be years 2 to 6. Students and teachers will be completing an online survey, and I'll be testing the 5 generic wellbeing constructs and the 7 school-specific wellbeing constructs. I apologise, the formatting seems to have gone there. The participants will respond to items from 1, which is low, to high. So I am engaged with my school, or I enjoy reading. So it's a range of different constructs that are going to be looked at. The factors will be tested in a series of confirmatory factor analyses, and the patterns of the means of these factors for Year 2 and Year 6 will be examined. So I want to be looking at whether there is a relationship between the PROSPER constructs and whether the first 6 elements equal resilience, basically. Given that I have no experience with statistical analysis, I'll be attending courses to upskill and learn how to analyse this data. So I talk about things like confirmatory factor analysis. So don't ask me any questions about that because I don't know. I've been actively applying for courses.
But there's one thing you do have, resilience.
I do have resilience, and I will get through. Definitely. So that is an important MB, which I was not going to skip over. So the limitations of this study, as far as I see so far, it's a cross-sectional study, so causal interpretation, directional interpretations, and overall conclusions are going to be limited somewhat. All data will be self-reported, so I would have liked to include some school achievement data, but I wasn't able to get the permission to get that data at this stage, so I think that's something for the future. And the other thing is, because it's a group of schools in the same area, the sample is relatively homogenous, and also the fact that there is a lot of publicity around wellbeing in this particular area, given the amount of media attention that the Where There's a Will program has been receiving, that is, I believe, doubtless going to have an impact on the parents' awareness of wellbeing. So, for example, if I was to find that there was a positive effect on resilience, it may be also to do with these other factors. So the third study is about positive education outcomes, so for the individual but also for the community. It's to determine the degree of impact, if any, that positive education has on the community. And in turn, it may be suggested that its implementation could contribute to the well-being of a community and a decrease in mental health difficulties. I've hypothesised that initiatives at the schools in which these programs are implemented will serve as a way of teaching the adults about well-being as well, through increased discussion of the topics. So, you know, kids going home and talking about what they've done at school today, items in the newsletter, homework, things like that. The other thing is that the effective implementation of positive education in school will have a positive effect on the well-being of the entire community. So I'm hoping that a knock-on effect could be caused from the classroom. So a teacher goes home and tells her or his family about what they've been doing today, etc., etc. Not to mention the fact that positive education should not just be in the classroom but across co-curricular areas as well. So you've got the football coaches also talking about well-being, resilience, all these different things. The method for this is going to be a qualitative study, which I'm slightly more at ease with. So I'm going to be interviewing 10 teachers and 10 parents who've been involved with the rollout of this intervention in a focus group scenario. I'll transcribe the interviews and analyse and identify the themes, and I will relate the findings to research about community wellbeing and resilience. In terms of the limitations of this study, sort of similar in terms of the sample size, because they're all from the same community as the last study. A case study can involve any combinations of interviews. Should say, sorry, I didn't finish that point. It should say that this will only be using interviews, so there's not going to be any observational data. So I'll be taking my conclusions from what they've said on that day. Oh yeah, a couple of weeks ago I felt this way, but I won't have any other opportunity to sort of validate that at this point. And yeah, as opposed to a longer term objective record. So this, as a part-time student, probably looks, it may be quite, what's the word?
Ambitious.
Ambitious, thank you. But I'm, you know, we'll see. So basically I've done the literature review and my confirmation of candidature. This year I'm going to be looking at the study 1 and 2, working towards the second year milestone presentation. In the third year we'll be looking at study 3 and my pre-submission seminar before submitting in 2020. And I'm going to be doing it through a series of publications. I would very much welcome any suggestions. I've got my paper ready. If anyone has any suggestions or comments about what I've said today, but thank you very much for listening.
Just a point of clarification, the study 2 is developing and testing an extensive set of measures. Will you be using those measures in study 3 in addition to the interviews?
Well, the study 3, while it looks like it'll be further on, I'm actually going to be using parents and teachers from the study 2, so it won't be an extra study, if you know what I mean. So I'll be talking to them though in the interviews about the measures. Is that?
Okay, but so there's an intervention.
Yes.
And these measures that you're collecting in study 2, they'll be part of the evaluation of the intervention?
Sorry, yes, yeah. So I'll be talking in the interviews, I'll be using those construction measures to talk to the students, to teachers and parents.
Okay, but the students are going to be filling out the measures?
Yes.
And you're going to use those as part of the as part of the evaluation of the intervention, as well as the interviews of teachers and parents?
Yes. To look at the outcomes, yes. So I'll be talking about outcomes of students from their surveys. Sorry, yes. Okay. Misunderstood the question.
Just wondering, with the framework you're using, how do you plan to, I guess, this is always a question I've had for positive education, how does it relate to older systems like the social emotional learning framework that has a set of competencies that best practice social emotional learning programs should target? I'm just wondering how you build on that and say what's new in positive education that hasn't been covered by that kind of SEL framework.
I think the SEL, so talking about the CASEL 5 core competencies.
Yes.
So I think the difference is that with Prosper there is a specific reference to resilience, whereas with the 5 SEL competencies, the idea is that if we have these social and emotional competencies such as self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, social awareness and relationship skills, they will lead to resilience. Whereas with Prosper, resilience is its own construct. So it's giving a lot more importance to, or it's giving importance to the fact that we need to specifically unpack what resilience looks like. So if you are in this situation, what could we do about it? And explicitly teaching that, as opposed to teaching relationship skills and then having students come up against a challenge where they need resilience, and then they turn to the people in their lives, which is of course something that's really, really important for resilience. But the difference is that Prosper is really explicitly looking at resilience, as opposed to hoping it's a result.
Are there other initiatives happening besides the discrete intervention as part of the, where there's a World Foundation program?
Yes, so there is visible wellbeing is in the Upper Hunter, which is another positive psychology intervention. The preliminary studies has already sort of started though. Is that? Mm-hmm. So they've been looking at visible wellbeing for the last sort of 6 months up in the Upper Hunter, so I'll have to take into consideration the fact that there will be, and that is another point I should have mentioned as well, the fact that all of these schools are also going through other wellbeing. So it might not be just the...
Determine what the... I mean, I'm not thinking...
That said though, it's not I'm not looking at whether Bounce Back itself has the... losing my words,
yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
has an impact. I'm more looking at whether these 7 constructs are separately identifiable. Right. So really it doesn't matter that there's more than one intervention going on, as long as there is an initiative. So I guess if anything, having 2 will mean that these kids are getting it from all areas. Yeah. And the other thing is that Visible Wellbeing looks after the sort of embedded, it's a program that looks at embedding wellbeing and positive psychology theories across schools, whereas Bounce Back looks more at the explicit teaching of the concept, so it still fits with that model of explicit versus embedded.
Because that was, I guess, one of my suggestions or concerns, is that for me the missing piece has been the organisational psychology approach. So as part of that model, I think you're absolutely right, like there are other areas that impact an org site in terms of a cultural change process is a crucial part of strategic and sustainable education.
So maybe actually it should be a triangle approach, and we have positive, educational, organisational.
So it's like the context, right? So if it's just everybody's burnt out and miserable and nobody wants to support it, you don't have that core 5 or 6 teachers that are like, yeah, this is awesome. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Following up on that, I guess the issue partially is an issue of unit analysis. So you're focusing on the student or the individual as a unit of analysis, but what you were talking about is really the school as a unit of analysis. And particularly given that you're focusing on a whole school approach, the implementation is going to be at a school level. And that will make or break, to some extent, the program.
It will. I think the unit of analysis as the student is important insofar as before I can address positive education at a school level, I need to know whether these 7 constructs are going to work and are measurable. So I guess the unit of analysis can be individual to begin with, and then if and when I can prove that they are.
Well, I wasn't suggesting either or. I was just suggesting that it needs to be that both of them need to be taken into account.
Both group and school-wide versus.
And that gets tough with the qualitative study, and also with a relatively few number of schools.
Yes. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I think.
Just wondering if there's any way of matching some of these parents and teachers based on the quantitative reports of study 2. So teachers, for example, that have multiple interventions, or from schools that have multiple interventions, or parents that, match to students with higher levels of those kind of 7 constructs that you've identified. If that kind of makes any sense in terms
So
of,
if you've got the student who's picking it up more,
Right,
whether
right.
that has a different...
and then also, the students that are picking it up less, you might find a bit more variability there potentially in your qualitative reports. I'm not a qualitative person though, so I could be completely wrong with that.
And I guess it could as well go the other way. So if you've got a parent who isn't,
Right.
well, then it's going, the role model for the child, they might not also be, I hadn't thought about that specifically, so thank you, I will. Sorry, yeah.
I was a bit surprised because in the beginning you mentioned how important the 2 goals of that Melbourne thing were. And then within your studies, you're basically focusing on well-being only. I know you said that you can't get the student achievement or grades, but is there any way to get a proxy or to also include that just because you emphasize
So, well, I think in a way, so equity is about making sure that equity in a school setting is about making sure that every student is given the amount of support they need to get to the same level as everybody else. So if this student can get there without the support and this student needs heaps of support, then they can both still get to the same level. And arguably that is what we would be trying to do with Prosper. So by putting in a positive education initiative which is promoting an environment where you can give students that much support, it is by virtue of that addressing goal 1 as well. But I didn't make that explicit, you're right. So if I'm going to, talk about both goals, I think. But okay, so I'll make a bit more of a point to that, because I do think, as I say, that goal 1 and goal 2 are equally addressed. But I guess because the word wellbeing is in goal 2, it's easier to sort of match it to goal 2, but you're absolutely right, the equity point I think needs to be covered as well. Thank you.
Final comments or questions before we kick you all out?
I've got a quick question. Such an amazing people in the room. One, I guess, missing piece for me the whole way through positive psychology has been a lack of publication on theories underpinning. Obviously, I refer to DC Malone a lot, but you've identified broaden and build theory. PERMA, I don't know, I've been discussing this with people, is it really a theory or is it more of a model?
A framework, I think possibly it is.
The other theory that I've used is hope theory, but I haven't really seen anything published generally. I don't know if anyone else has seen anything, but specifically now, given that you are working in education, I think there's a real need for that. For something to be published.
Hope theory?
Hope theory?
Okay.
Yeah, Snyder? Lopez? Snyder and Lopez is hope theory. Yeah, it's really, and it's had a lot of research in the US predicting grade point average as well.
It's interesting.
What age?
Just,
I think junior and senior high school, both.
In Australia as well.
And Australia?
Yeah, our studies, yeah. Six-year longitudinal in positive psychology.
And it'd be great to see
That's all right.
published.
Nobody noticed anyway. I'm okay. I'm kind of See, Belginder fell down. She's one of the co-authors on that. She was so shocked. She's so shocked nobody's reading it.
Apologies. But yeah, does anyone have any comments or thoughts on that? Like, am I the only person that sees that huge missing piece?
I agree with you about PERMA. I don't even know what the theory is. It's good. It's good to have these qualities. Isn't really a theory. Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah.
Maybe just a paper or a chapter on the key theories.
I'm just curious in relation to this, because I think this is quite timely. Has anybody seen the PISA survey?
Yes, I was going to mention that.
Well, has anybody else seen it? Anybody got a link to it? Well, it came out, was it last week?
Yes, I
Susie?
filled it in.
Are you saying PESA?
SA.
Not PISA.
No,
Positive Education.
Positive
Okay.
Education Schools Association. It's a survey which has been sent out to supporters and friends, so who knows who that might be, but obviously Susie and I are in there. But they are essentially pushing PERMA. They want it to be the accepted framework for
Wasn't
POS
that
Ed. They said it is essential that we come up with a framework that goes out to everybody as the accepted framework for positive education, and we want everybody to agree to this. It took me probably a couple of hours to respond to that survey in great depth.
Yeah.
Well, you're editing all the curse words out.
And actually put my name on the end because I thought, oh, guess who it is anyway.
Just out yourself.
But I thought it was just a huge concern. I really did. And I just was really curious about just how widespread. Herb, did you put that survey?
That's nuts.
Oh.
PERMA, they're trying to trademark it and sell
They
it.
are absolutely.
I received the survey and I thought of it as a marketing device.
That's
You saw, you
I
got
interpreted it as a marketing device, but I
Yes.
did not participate. I mean, I actively did not. I thought, I don't want to be part of this. So it was really a turnoff to me.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, you felt this push.
Well, I thought I saw it as a turn off too, but I did respond in depth.
But you're not going to be sold. You're going to be sold PERMA products for the next 20 years. The PERMA purse.
Oh well, but I think it's a very big issue because it is very much pushing just one line, and it's evolved from positive psychology and where is the voice of education, I think.
Or even, as I said, all the psych approaches as well, which
Yes.
is crucial for the cultural change bit.
Yes.
Which I had a lot to say as well. But, you know, EP has such an important role to play here. So how do
Yeah, we are. I think that this should be a responsibility of this organisation.
Like a PERMA sucks paper? How said that in a Did we say that?
The question was raised earlier is that PERMA is a set of constructs, or at best a set of goals or outcomes to strive for, but how is it a theoretical? It's a theoretical, you could call it a taxonomy or something like that, but it's not really a theory of how to get there.
It's not really his taxonomy per se.
Huh?
It's not really his taxonomy. It was written about 2 decades ago by Riff, and people were already, you know what I mean? Just because you arranged it into a cool acronym doesn't really mean that you made it. I mean, I do lots of acronyms. STD,
Be careful how you say that.
BTS, BTS.
Final thoughts.
Related is that, in my opinion, positive psychology does not do a very good job of dealing with meta theory before you even get to theory.
Yes.
What is the philosophical assumptions about the nature of people that we're doing?
Absolutely.
Because the theory just rolls out once you're clear about that, and no place have I ever seen that dealt with in a satisfactory way in positive psychology.
Yeah.
We do.
You do, yeah.
This is called SGT.
I think there are a few chapters at the beginning of Brian's book that rolls all that up.
So basically, Susie hasn't read anything.
I haven't. I've been my God.
Good God, you didn't read that.
Okay. Well, thank you all for your suggestions. I'll ask the supervisors to stick around. And Rose, unfortunately, you have to vacate as well. We'll call you back in.